Here's where loudness gets surgical. Clipping and limiting. Both tame peaks, but how they do makes a huge difference. Technically, a limiter is a compressor with a high ratio and fast attack designed to prevent peaks from exceeding a threshold. Clipping, on the other hand, is a hard ceiling truncation. It chops the waveform. Whether analog or digital, it adds harmonics. Sometimes they're tasty, and yes, sometimes they're trashy. Psychoacoustically, limiting preserves tone, but can sound smeared or squashed at extreme settings. Clipping introduces harmonics that has the ability to enhance aggression and presence, but adds distortion, something our ear can be very sensitive to. Used smartly, clipping before limiting can reduce the workload of the limiter and preserve more punch. But done wrong, well, it can sound like frying bacon on blown speakers.
Now I'm really hungry.
Okay, so I'm very excited to work on today's video with everybody, and it kind of comes on the heels of a conversation I just had with an artist I do some mix work for. He likes to do his own rough mixes and sent me over something he wanted mixed along with his rough and said that he really wanted the volume to be as loud as his rough, and he just learned on YouTube that he should be using a soft clipper to get his mixes very loud. When I loaded the mix up into the DAW to start doing some work, I noticed that the actual rough had a lot of artifacts in it. There were aspects of it that were starting to distort and blow up. And I decided to have a conversation with the artist and ask if A, he noticed those things, and if he did, were these the things that he wanted in the music, or was this done unintentionally? And his response was, I had no idea that was going on in my mix. I just like to listen to it very loud in my car. And that's a great point. Loudness can really be a vibe for a lot of us, especially just the listening public, right? We notice something's loud, we notice something hits, but as engineers and producers, we have to have an ear that can go just a little bit deeper, that we can know what to listen for and understand whether or not we're getting a true sense of a loud mix that still retains its transients and openness and punches and will continue to feel louder and louder the more we turn the volume up, whether on a PA speaker or a car system, or if we're hearing something that really is kind of tricking us into feeling like it's loud. And the harder we try to push it, we notice that it just feels like it's getting more and more trapped in the speakers. And today I'm going to point out a couple things to start sharpening your ear to in regards to noticing these things and being able to have some workarounds, whether or not you were trying to get a mix of your own really loud, or whether you have an artist asking you if you can really crank their mix and get it into, a much higher decibel level or LUFS reading. As usual, we're going to start with our tone track over here. And into it, we are going to feed a limiter and a soft clipper and get a sense of what each is adding to our sound source, whether it's a bus or whether it's an entire mix, so that we can make an informed choice and understand what else is being added to the music, because that's something that we should know so that we can make intentional decisions. So this is our reader. We have a 1K test tone being fed in, and the first thing we will do is put up an L2 limiter. And what we notice is that all it's doing is just pushing down against that, but we're not getting anything else. So kudos to FabFilter for having a super transparent limiter. We're hitting this thing insanely hard, as you can see here, 6 dB of limiting being done, and everything's pretty clean. Now, let's see if that's the case with the Gold Clip by Schwab, which I believe is a plugin that is modeled after the Lavry Gold converters. If anybody knows that for a fact, just let me know, but I think that's the case. And we're not going to get into a ton of the settings because this isn't really a tutorial on this particular plugin. If you do have questions, feel free to ask me. Obviously, if you have comments, you could feel free to throw them down in the section below. But we're just going to look at what happens when we drive the same level into a soft clipper that we just did into a limiter. And lo and behold, we have a lot of harmonic richness taking place, which, as you can see, is mainly third harmonics that are jumping up, but just an absolute ton of density. So this is something that we should know. And why would this be something that we would want to really have a good handle of going into? Well, say I built a mix and I used a lot of saturation, I used a tape plugin, I used some compressors that have transformers that add harmonics. So I'm just along the way stacking all this harmonic content. And now I want to go and make it loud. And I pump it into a soft clipper and start just driving in. That's even more harmonic content that I am adding into a mix, which could start to make it feel very brittle, could make it feel harsh, make the top start to feel a little blurry. So something that's important for us to know going in. Okay, so now let's move on to the listening examples. And today we're going to have two different examples. We're going to have our normal rock track that you're probably absolutely sick of, and then we're also going to work in a hip hop one, but essentially the one that we would call a bass heavy mix, something that we would have to, approach our limiting and our loudness a little different. We get comments below, in some of the other videos, people ask, hey, can you, do something that's hip hop based or EDM based for all the non, rock enthusiasts that are out there. So wanted to include you so that you have some takeaways for your work as well. Now, the next thing, the caveat I want to say, our examples are going to be stupid loud. They might not translate to being very, very loud on your playback system because we're not trying to blow speakers out and we want things to feel, pretty level across, but these are being limited or clipped well past what I would do using my taste sensibilities. But we have to kind of push it like this so that you can hear and start latching your ear onto what starts to happen when these are driven into at this capacity. So we're kind of working around -5 LUFS, which again, in my opinion, we're kind of pushing stupid loud, but I've had plenty of people send me rough mixes that have been louder than that, and I have had, reference mixes that have hit at that level, and I've had artists that have asked me to push things to that level. And we have to remember again that loudness is perceived. Sounds funny because we tend to perceive with eyes, but in this situation, it's our ears. And we could have things hitting on a meter that are telling us this is supposed to feel loud and actually feel kind of soft. And we could have things on a meter that aren't hitting as hard, but actually feel very forward and very in your face. So again, perceived loudness is very important. All of our examples are level matched. If you are looking at anything and kind of studying some stuff while we're doing things, you'll notice that the bus is named just limit, clip and limiter, and then I'm going to tell you what this is at the end. They're all turned down, and that is so that we can hear what the mix through whatever, loudness tool that we're looking to do sounds like against a raw mix, which when you are mixing at home and you're doing things like this, absolutely make sure that you are level matching. If you are gaining up your mix by, 7 dB, then make sure you have another version of the mix or something loaded up that you can bring the 7 dB one up, down, to hear what they sound like apples to apples and truly understand what it is that is being compromised in your mix. Because that's what we have to remember, right? A lot of times there's really no main solutions, only trade-offs. We have to trade something for loudness. And what it is, we really want to know going in so we can make an informed decision. So enough chatter. We'll listen raw for a second to the rock loop. I've been telling myself this for days. And the first thing we're going to do is work with the limiter. And I'll keep this open here. First, we'll listen to the limiter. I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever want to go down and burn in fire nuclear rays. Now I'm cool and it feels like... And let's compare that to the raw mix. So here's the limiter again. I've been telling myself this for days. Wanna go down and burn in fire nuclear rain. Now I'm cool. So we're going to do the example again, and I want you to listen. Now, think of the mix as a box, right? And when we're listening to the raw one, think of how the sound is filling out that box. However big or small that box might be, depending on the quality of the mix and the width achieved and everything else, right? But still, there's a box. Now, when we engage the limiter, what it feels like to me is if this is the size of the box, right, which is really representing our width, it starts to turn in a little bit. And then what else starts to happen is the floor starts to come up, but not in a defined way. It starts to come up in just an energy way, where we're not hearing the bass and the kick hit and punch harder, but rather it feels like it's compressed air. Like they're inside something and it's like a pressure cooker and they're trying to get out. So you're just feeling that energy more than you are the definition. And then if you remember our triangle example, right, that we were using with the EQs and everything, the mix starts to tilt a little more for you. So it feels like the energy when you put that limiter on is pushing towards the center. I don't want to say that this is a bad thing. It's a decision. Am I going to put a limiter on to make my mix loud and just drive in? Where that could be good is if you had a very thin mix to begin with, maybe a lot of transient information, but not a lot of density. And you could actually take a limiter and kind of push in, and yeah, you might lose a little bit of width, but you're going to probably pick up some power and some fullness that maybe the original mix lacked, along with obviously volume, which again tricks the ear into thinking that things are louder. So let's go back now and let's listen again and think of that box and listen to the raw one, and then when we kick on the limiter, listen to how it kind of pushes in a little bit. And this is where when we go to an extreme, a mix can start to feel small, even though you're trying to make it loud. And it's something to listen for and make sure that you hear it and are on board with it, and it's not happening to what you're doing accidentally.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever wanna go down and burn in fire nuclear rays. Now I'm cool and it feels like I'm living my youth. I don't wanna turn you around.
The other thing you notice is it feels like the mid-range of the mix has caught a cold. It feels a little stuffy, and I think that might be a little bit more noticeable when we work through the other examples as well. But essentially, it feels like the walls of the mix are being pushed in, squeezed in, right? So if you've worked really hard on building this great depth of field and everything else, and then you just kind of slap a limiter on at the end, this is what you're doing. You're kind of just like pushing the walls in and the ceiling and the floor in on your mix and kind of driving more energy down the center. Okay, so now let's go and look at the clipper. Keep this open so that you can see that we are basically all staying apples to apples. Start with raw.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't wanna go down and burn in fire nuclear rays. Now I'm cool and it feels like youth. I don't wanna turn you around, although I'm predetermined to fail.
So the clipper is doing, in my opinion, what's advertised. We're hearing some excitement on the top end via the fact that it's kind of sawing the waveforms off and replacing what was going above the line, right? Like here's the line, the mountain peak kind of goes above, replacing what's going above with essentially some saturation, some distortion, right? It's kind of flatlining. So we're hearing the transients feel like they're getting longer, like a little splattier at the top. And sometimes that can be cool, but what we're also noticing here is that we're starting to get a little bit too much distortion in the top of the mix. So listen again and notice how things are starting to feel like they're splatting a little more and that we're introducing a little bit more distortion at the top. So here's the clipped one to begin.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't let down and burn in fire nuclear rays. Now I'm cool and it feels like I don't wanna turn you around.
And the vocal and the cymbals are starting to distort a little bit, which is, for me, making the vocal feel a little bit dull. It feels more open. Like, let's compare the limit to just a clip, and it should feel a little bit more open or excited at the top, but at the same point, I'm still hearing that distortion on the vocal. So we'll start with limiting.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't let go down and burn in fire nuclear rays. Now I'm cool and it feels living my youth. I don't wanna tell you, although I'm predetermined to fail.
So the vocal feels in the clipped one a little bit more open. It doesn't feel like it has that nasal congestion like we're hearing with the limit bus where the mid-range is getting clogged up a little bit. But the cymbals are starting to sound a little cheap to me, and like right at the top of all the transients, you kind of hear that splat, and I'm noticing it with the cymbals as well. And I really don't like what just the clipper's doing to the cymbals, the vocal. The transients are kind of cool. I mean, that's a vibe. You know, you hear a lot of songs that have that like drum break or old drum sampled kind of sound. Now, I'm not sure that for a track like this, where we want it to hit hard and feel like hard rock, that over clipping the transients is the move, but it's also a vibe. So we talked about the pros and cons, right? Like where limiting, if you had a very, very thin mix and you kind of drove that in, you're going to pick up some of that density and, you know, get a little bit of thickness in the mid range, bring that low floor up a little bit and kind of drive a little more energy down the center. Where with clipping, if you had a dull mix, it could add some excitement to it if you had some transients that, were maybe needed a little bit of what felt like some snap or a little bit of life to them. They felt a little dull. This could be cool as well because you do get that saturation at the top of it. So now, one of the themes of all of our videos has been the sense of not asking one piece of gear to do a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to whether it's compression, really anything that you're looking to kind of move miles with and say we have a ways to go. And sometimes by a ways to go, I might mean, anything between 5 decibels and up of anything. That's asking something to do a little bit of heavy lifting, and we should know the units that we're using in regards to how they respond when asked to do that kind of workload. So
Share the load, share the load, the load, the load.
our third bus here is where we try to combine the best of both worlds. So we put up the soft clipper and we're going to move that into the limiter. And the way that I set it up was I'm not trying to go crazy. I mean, we are still chopping it off because I do want you to hear what this is like. But we're splitting the load up because now here, look, we're not driving too hard into the limiter. And we're going to ask both of these to kind of work in tandem to give us something that is a little bit more natural. So let's just compare this in and of itself to the raw bus. So first we'll start with the raw bus.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever wanna go down and burn in fire nuclear rays. Now I'm cool and it feels like I don't wanna turn you around, although I pretend to
For bias reasons, I do like this one so far the best. It's the closest. With the limiting bus, the negatives where you could hear the low end pumping, smearing, losing clarity, and the mid-range kind of catching a cold. With the clipper, you started hearing a lot of distortion at the top that we weren't, that at least I wasn't a huge fan of. And with the clipper and the limiter, we're getting a little bit of that transient shaving from the clipper so that we can then push into the limiter and have the limiter ride the body, right? So we're asking the clipper, hey man, give us a little bit of help with these transients. And then we're saying to the limiter, hey, now that we've kind of given you a little bit of help with the transients, give us a little bit of help with the body. And we're not asking either one to do too much, so we're not getting pumping or grabbing or things that are going to start to kind of just squeeze the mix. So one more time, let's listen to it. And when we do, again, think of that box that we were talking about and see if you notice any difference in that box and if it closes in, if that, if we're feeling a shift in that triangle analogy that we're using as well. And this time, I'm going to actually rifle down them all. Okay, so we start with the raw.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever wanna go down and burn in fire nuclear rays. Now I'm cool and it feels like I'm living my youth. I don't wanna turn you around, although I pretend to I've been telling myself I don't ever wanna go down.
So on the clip and limiter, we bring the sides in like a little bit. I mean, that's the character of the limiter, right? The limiter, no matter what, is going to do that. But it's not nearly as drastic. The low end isn't pumping at all, and we're not getting that kind of, those little distortion blips or the overhyped or overprocessed feel of the cymbals that I'm noticing when we are just clipping. So now let's go down to this bus that I labeled stack. It's essentially just a quick version of what I tend to do, and I don't want to act like I created this. I most likely didn't, and it's 100% used by lots of different people in lots of different ways. But it's essentially a quick chain that I'll set up for loudness. This doesn't live like this on my normal mix bus. My normal mix bus, I'll have an EQ at the top of my mix bus, and then at the very, very end of the mix bus will be the gold clip into an L2. And those will be essentially my loudness setter and part of my mastering chain. If I'm sending this to master, if the artist has a budget and I'm mixing and somebody else is mastering, then I will send the mastering engineer a version with this engaged, and then I will send them one with the gold clip and the L2 bypassed, but a picture of their settings in case they need to recreate something or in case like they can build on top of what I did. Because most of the time, for me personally, this is about 5 dBs louder than I tend to deliver mixes. Most of the time, my mixing is set up to be somewhere between -12 LUFS LUFS and like -8 LUFS. So that range is the range I tend to deliver mixes based off my conversation with the artist. And the next video that we have will kind of tie into how to make those choices based off release preferences and things like that. With this, I set up a gold clip at the front to do exactly like we talked about earlier. Just give me a little bit of transient management. So let me bypass everything here and we'll just look at this.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever wanna go down and burn in fire nuclear rays.
So we're just kind of working just a little bit of transient management there. And then the next thing I do is I go into my first L2. Now this one I set to be a little slower, and I don't want to go super fast with the release because a lot of times too, remember, you can get distortion if you're releasing too quick. You can get some pumping and some distortion. To give myself a little bit of variance amongst the two, I set this one to punchy, and I also lowered the volume because I'm going into an EQ after this where I'm going to do some EQ moves, and I don't need to send this at full volume into the EQ. But let's see what it's doing.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever wanna go down and burn in fire nuclear rays. Now I'm cool and it feels like I'm living my youth.
So about 2 dB of limiting. And what I'm focused on is making sure that I'm still keeping the transients and that the mix is still staying intact and not doing that massive side squeeze in and like forward lean. So now the next thing that I do is as we limit, and we know, right, that we're kind of getting a little bit of a cold in the mid range and the low end can smear a little bit, I set up an EQ that provides me the opportunity to do a little bit of carving. And these are the areas that for me, I didn't like, and I'll play this.
I've been I don't ever wanna go fire nuclear rays.
So I started with those three, and I basically kind of moved around to find the resonant frequencies that I didn't like that were being accentuated by the limiter. And also I rolled off a little bit of bottom because I don't need all that extra bottom for a rock mix. Like this area right here doesn't have a ton of useful information. And again, remember, there's few solutions, only trade-offs. So if I want this mix to feel open and loud, I might have to just get rid of a little bit of the junk at the bottom. And then also because, as we mentioned before, we noticed the limiter kind of gives that mid-range head cold, makes things feel a little dull. I put a little bit of a boost. Just, I mean, we're half a dB because when you're talking about kind of mastering moves, you're usually working in like, you know, a dB one way or the other is a pretty big deal. So we're working in micro moves here, but they do make a difference. And I will bypass this for a second, that EQ boost, and let's listen to what that does.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever wanna go down.
I'm gonna do it again and pay attention to the top end of the vocal and the cymbals and notice the lift, the life that we get into that, and also the top of the transient information, like where the bead would be hitting the snare drum and stuff like that. So here it is off.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever wanna go down and burn in fire nuclear.
So you can hear how we put a little bit of life back in post limiting. And now the finisher, which is our last limiter that we're going to drive into. This one a little bit faster because we are, you know, looking to make sure that at this point, anything that is really wild that's getting over is going to be knocked down. We're not going to have, you know, any sort of like intersample peaking, things like that, you know, could sneak past us. Like just making sure that we're a little bit on the quicker side.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever wanna go down and burn in fire nuclear rays. Now I'm cool and it feels like I'm living my youth.
Okay, so let's go through and listen. But here's what I like about doing things this way. We're not getting the pumping and the head cold that just a limiter gets us. We're also not getting the sides squeezing in. We're not getting the cheapness and the, say, oversaturation that just relying on a clipper is doing. And for the clip and limit, we're getting the difference. We're getting a little bit more life back in. I'm hearing the bass and the kick still retain their shape. We're hearing the snap of the transients coming through through and we're getting the volume that we need. Actually, this one is a little bit louder than the other ones as well. And even though it's going to be volume matched on the end here, knowing that if the volume match was off, this one would be the loudest is kind of cool because it doesn't seem to fall apart like the other ones do. So let's listen through. Again, we'll start with the raw.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever wanna go down and
You can hear the pumping there.
raise.
That thins out, but has a little bit more distortion.
I've been telling myself this for days. I don't ever wanna go down.
Is cool, but the low end is still pumping and the image squeezed a little bit.
Now I'm cool, and it feels like I'm living my youth. I don't wanna turn you around, although I pretend. Ooh, I've been telling this for days. I don't ever wanna go down. Burning fire nuclear rays. Now I'm cool, and it feels like I'm living my youth.
So the purpose of what it is that we're doing here isn't to say that one of these is a better method than the other. Like I'm trying to sell you on, say, the stack one of clip into a limiter and then clean up what the limiter's doing and then limit again. That's the way to go. All of these have positive attributes and they all have negative, which again is to me the most important message of today is there's very few solutions most of the time, only trade-offs. And we have to know what we're getting ourselves into when we're trying to make something loud. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone through the rock version of this, let's check out the hip hop version of it. Now, one of the next videos, not the next, but I'm going to be making videos that discuss how to go about setting your mix up to be loud, how to build a loud mix from almost start to finish. This rough mix right here, which I didn't touch yet, I have a whole host of issues with this mix that I will point out when I break this mix down and just try to optimize it to be loud. But for now, we're taking essentially, we're almost looking like we're living like a mastering engineer on this one, right? We didn't do the mix. This mix isn't us. We were handed this and told, hey, make this loud. So I'll play it for a second just to get an idea of what it is.
All the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears.
So first thing you probably noticed is the bloom of the bass in the low end, right? If somebody says they want this mix loud, in order for this mix to still feel impactful, that bass still has to have meaning and has to have context. So if we turn and just drive it into a limiter, we're going to run into a lot of issues. First and foremost, the limiter itself is going to just grab that bass and use that essentially and the kick to kind of be triggering the mix. Now, overall, the production on this is pretty good because you have your low end elements, which are giving you the big bottom feel, but you don't have a ton of other stuff in the mids and highs that are just like kind of cluttering up the mix where they're just as important. Like the mix is centered around that bass line and the kick and then that mid-rangey vocal. So first things first, everything again level matched. Let's listen to the raw and then we'll kick on the limiter.
Went through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneer. Didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears. So I can get my focus on. I'm writing one of the dopest songs. This music's one of the closest phones I've holding on. And I never was posing for them cameras. Fuck you when the glamorous, this real shit.
So I like what the limiter is doing more with this mix than I did with the rock mix, where you felt everything just kind of pumping. My complaint is that the low end is kind of smearing. So we're losing the kick in the bass. It's kind of being swallowed up by it or being pushed down into it. And again, we're getting that mid-range congestion. We're going to double back, but let's move on to the clipper now and see what we're getting from the clipper. So first the raw.
Went through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears till I shine when the drama finally clears. So I can get my focus on. I'm writing one of the dopest songs. This music's one.
No. If I had a dime for every mix that I get sent that feels like this, I could retire right now. And that'd be dope because I'd be on a, well, I can't, I'd be on a beach. I burn in January in New Jersey. So yeah, I probably wouldn't be on a beach, but I'd be somewhere cool.
Honey, focus.
So what you probably heard, right, is the transients are blowing up, especially when that double kick hits hits with the bass one more time, check that out. It just distorts. Now, I've heard mixes, even commercial mixes, that have been released that kind of have this vibe. And again, this is what we talk about with loudness being a vibe. If that's the way you want it to be, like, no, man, I want this mix to sound like it's blowing your system up, okay, that's a different conversation. But if these artifacts aren't intended, then you are now doing something highly destructive to the mix by putting a soft clipper on that is just obliterating the top of those transients. So here we go again. Listen to the distortion.
Through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears. So
every time that bass blooms and you get that double kick, it distorts. And the top of the vocal is also distorting. Now, again, to an unseasoned ear, right? Or to just somebody just wants to just turn this thing up, listen, it isn't sitting around like we are, which is why this community is awesome, that we sit around and like to nerd out about this stuff. But if somebody just wants to turn it up and doesn't really give a damn, right? It might sound more exciting because you're getting that saturation at the top. It might not feel as dull, but it's absolutely blowing up. And if you did have a more seasoned producer that sent you this, or a label that sent you this to mix, and they're not looking for you to do that to it, you could be in trouble in a hurry. Okay, so now let's move on to the clip and limit bus, where we discussed we're going to use a little bit of transient management from the clipper, and then we're feeding it into a limiter. First, we'll start with the raw.
through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still just should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears. So I can get my focus on them right.
Okay, so it's doing the clipping thing just a little bit, but it's kind of cool, considering the fact that, you know, maybe there would have been a little bit of, you know, saturation or something added to the kick or the bass to kind of give it a little bit of fuzz. This isn't as egregious or offensive to me as just the clipper was. I still don't love it. And I still, if it was me mixing and they asked me they said, in order to get paid, you have to deliver the mix at this LUFS, I would keep searching for another solution before I would say, okay, this is what we have to live with if you want it this loud with me working on a track. Maybe somebody that just has a whole other host of tricks could come up with something different. Which brings me to, well, let's actually go through these three first, comparing them to each other. So here's the limiter.
Through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get that shit dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears. So I can get my focus in one of the dopest songs. This music's bones I found what I've been holding on. And I never was to showing.
And something else that's worth noting, working with songs that have a big low end, or hip hop, rap, whatever it is that you're gonna be doing, pop music that has, you know, big sub stuff going on. Even though the limiter is kind of cool, it's choking the low end, because the role of the bass in this is to kind of bloom up and give you impact and kind of lend like weight to what's happening. So when you take that and you kind of just like flatten it out and it's just the whole time, you kind of lose the impact of the bloom of those big notes. You can hear it in the raw, and you can also hear that bloom a little bit in the clipped version. But the ones that have the limiter, we're hearing it kind of flatten out. We're hearing the low end come up, so the whole thing feels more bass heavy. But yet, while that's like, oh, cool, it feels like it has more bass, it actually feels like the bass is less impactful. And that's something that I definitely want you to think about. So with the stack version that I did here, this is actually something when I am working on hip hop and rap and things like that and need to get something loud, I kind of work this way. And it's a little counterintuitive, but the first thing that I do actually is I put an EQ at the front of everything and I pull the low out. So let me bypass everything for a second here. Open this up.
Through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears. So I can get my focus on them writing when it.
So the first thing I'm doing is I'm pulling that low down. And why am I doing that? Because I want to protect it. I want to protect it from everything that's about to follow. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the gold clip on. Now the gold clip in this situation is going to kind of be taming a little bit of the transients at the top, but because we're kind of pulling the lows down first, they're going to be shielded a little bit from running head on into this, like kind of being like the ones like, you know, like with the flag at the front of the army that's like charging, like that's our low end. We don't want our low end to be that in this situation. We want the low end to be like way in the back telling everybody else, hey, you go first, you go first, you go first.
Through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears, so I can get my focus on them.
So you could hear we're protecting the transients, right?
Went through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine.
So I even just pushed it a little more there, and we still aren't hearing the splat or the low end start to kind of blow up. Now, the next thing we do is like we did in our clip and limit. We're going to go into a limiter, punchy, same kind of concept, and we're going to push in and start doing a little bit of limiting to get some volume going.
Went through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears, so I can get
about 3, right? And our goal is, again, we're listening to the low end, making sure that we're protecting that low end, allowing it to feel big as we bring the level up. So it's kind of like we keep adding a tool and then we keep working between those 3. So I wouldn't even move on to anything else. I'd keep toggling between these 3 to kind of dial in where I feel like I protected my low end enough, but I'm also picking up level and I'm not hearing things start to get dull or smushed or anything else. So just like in the other example of the stack, I bring in an EQ next that again is going to be surgical for me. I'm still going to protect a little more low end as I'm going into my final limiter. I'm doing the lift that we talked about, and I'm also putting a little bit of bump to make sure that I'm kind of emphasizing some of that knock in the kick drum as well a little bit as we're kind of looping things down. So let's listen without.
went through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears, so I can get my focus on. I'm writing one of the dopest songs.
Hear how when I pulled the shelf back in and out, like the vocal lifted, the hats lifted a little bit. Pay attention to that again.
Went through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message,
And you remember we talked about, right, how frequencies can feel up, down, forward, back, right? So lifting gives an extension. It's kind of like a way to psychoacoustically work against that ceiling that the limiter is bringing down on us. Now let's listen to see if we get anything out of this little bump at 100.
went through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears, so I can get my focus on. I'm writing one of the dopest songs.
Listen to the kick and imagine a kick being a circle. If we are thinking about this, I hear it a little bit at kind of like the bottom of the circle. It just gives a little bit more weight in the bottom of the circle. So here we are out.
Went through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I
You hear that? So we're trying to preserve the bloom of the bass, but we want to make sure that our kick drum still has some weight and that it's not completely sinking down into the bass line, like how we noticed with the limiter and just kind of smearing the whole low end. Okay, and then last but not least, we have our limiter. Didn't do anything fancy. I think it's probably just copied over from the other ones.
went through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Still didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears, so I can get my focus on. I'm writing one of the dopest songs. This music's one of the closest phones I've phoned while I've been.
On a meter, we are louder than the other mixes, but I'm still hearing more movement in the low end. So let's confirm, because this is being done kind of in real time here, so I'm not like, you know, I haven't had a chance to really go through and crazy A/B. So let's do an A/B across the board here. So here we go with the raw.
Went through all the years, always tried to learn from the pioneers. Didn't get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears, so I can get my focus on. I'm writing songs. This music's one of the closest phones I've phoned while I've been holding on. And I never was just showing off, posing for them cameras. Fuck you in the shit, I can handle this. I kill shit, fuck the championships. Never been a fan of this. Went through all the years.
Okay, so here's what I've noticed. We'll go through one more time, and I want you to pay attention to the relationship of the bass to the vocal. With the limiter, the bass and vocal feel like they are now like right on top of each other, and those blooms that we notice in the bass aren't there to the extent that they are when the bass isn't being as, you know, heavily limited. The clip, it feels a little more open, but but it's distorting. So we're hearing that distortion when the big bass hits and kicks line up. The clip and limit is cool. You can notice it brings the bass up like to the same level as the limiter in a sense, but we're getting a little bit of that kind of splat from the gold clip, which I don't like. And then in the one that we kind of created here with a little bit more of an extensive chain, it to me feels open. The relationship to the vocal and the bass feel great. It feels like it has that energy that like we're getting from the limiter, but the vocal feels much more present. It doesn't feel as kind of washed over or head coldy. So see if you notice those as I move through this again.
Been through all the years, always try to learn from the pioneers. Get the message, I should dry my ears. I can wait till I shine when the drama finally clears, so I can get my focus on songs. This music's one of the closest phones I've phone what I've been holding on. And I never was just showing off, posing for them cameras. Fuck you in the glamour.
See how the bass just feels wide open here? It's still hitting. The vocal feels present. The whole thing feels more transparent. Now, again, that's my style. I like to be really intentional with everything I do. So when I'm doing things like this, I'm not looking to put some kind of EJ Gob coloring on your mix. I'm looking to draw out exactly what you're looking to have happen through that mix. And if you're telling me you want it loud, well, then I want the mix to feel as loud as possible, but still as preserved and authentic as possible. That's just me. Other mixers, love to work with vibe and imparting their tone on things and come up with some really cool stuff. But I think it's important as we kind of went through to understand what the pros and cons were of each. Now, let me leave you with a little bit of an organized thought pattern here. And where I want you to think when you're working with loudness and limiting and clipping and everything else is the dark side of things. Like asking yourself, where did I go or did I go too far? And here's a checklist that I want you to use. The first, I want you to ask yourself, are my transients smearing? Are they losing shape? Or do my transients feel still natural and authentic to the mix that was crafted? The next thing is distortion. Am I hearing any extra distortion in my mix, especially in the vocals and the cymbals? The third thing, is my low end collapsing? Am I noticing movement or does it feel like just energy and rumble? The last thing is harsh mids, which is, does this mix start to fatigue my ear the more I listen to it? And especially at louder volumes, is the 2 to 5K range feeling very fragile? I'll give you a bonus one. The bonus one is, are things starting to feel dull? Like they're over-processed and aspects becoming buried? So that is, to me, a great checklist that you can have written down near where you're doing or just, memorized. And whenever you are toggling, and I strongly suggest making sure that you level match, listen to what you've done after you've made it louder, bring that volume way down and listen to it against the normal mix level, and then determine whether or not what you're doing is helping. Because if we listen to all of these at their volume that the processing brought it up to compared to the raw, almost all of them you'd say sounds better, because we perceive as humans louder is better. But when we hear things compared apple to apples, we can start noticing more of the destructive qualities and the trade-off of trying to make things louder. So I hope you enjoyed this. I had an absolute ton of fun making it. The next one's going to be all about different platforms and what loudness means on those platforms and understanding your meters. And then from there, we're going to move on and we're going to talk about building loud mixes from start to finish. Okay, my friends, have an awesome day and I will see you in the next video.